Get that fence off my land right now!
How dare you? We have the permits right here!
Margaret Chen's voice was sharp and dismissive. That fence has been there for 3 years. It marks the community boundary. No one's ever complained before. I'm sure we can work something out, but the fence isn't moving. Like 3 years of encroachment could erase what the survey had just proven. Like $31,000 spent. Without surveying could override 12 acres of continuous ownership. What she didn't know was that I had the email where she admitted the fence. It was on my land and chose to fight anyway. This wasn't a boundary dispute or unclear property line. 12 acres. 300 feet of 6-foot vinyl fence with stone columns. An HOA president who'd built 25 feet onto my property without surveying, without asking permission, and refused to remove it when caught. Margaret made the mistake every HOA president makes, assuming that community benefit and established use gave her the right to build on someone else's land, and that litigation would be cheaper than admitting the mistake. It wasn't over 9 months. I watched Margaret Chen discover what happens when you build a $31,000 fence without spending $500 on a survey. Tell your contractor you don't need one. And admit in writing the fence is on someone else's land, but refuse to move it. This is the story of how an HOA president lost her position, her home, and cost her community $86,000 because she couldn't answer one question the judge asked. Did you obtain a survey before building? Not because I wanted to destroy her, because property law doesn't care how much you spent or how long it's been there. It cares who owns the land and what happens when you build on property that was never yours. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. I inherited the property in early February. 12 acres of mostly wooded land on the eastern edge of town, bordered on one side by Riverside Meadows, an upscale HOA community of about 200 homes. The land had been in my family since 1976, and my grandfather bought it for a few $1,000s. He'd used it for hunting and camping, keeping a small travel trailer parked near the access road. When he passed, it went to my father. When my father passed, it came to me. I'd visited a handful of times as a kid, but I hadn't been out there. In over a decade, the property was quiet, rural, and mostly untouched, just trees, a few clearings, and the remnants of my grandfather's old trails. Riverside Meadows had been built in the early 2010s, developed on what used to be farmland. The HOA was strict. Brick or stone facades required, manicured lawns, architectural review for any exterior changes. It was the kind of community where people measured grass height and reported neighbors for unapproved mailbox colors. My 12 acres sat directly to the east of Riverside Meadows' boundary, separated by what I assumed was a property line marked by old survey stakes and a tree line. I hadn't planned to do anything with the land immediately, but after a few months, I decided I wanted to build a small cabin on the eastern section close to the road access, with a view of the clearing my grandfather used to camp in. To get a building permit, I needed a site plan. And to get a site plan, I needed a survey. I hired a licensed surveyor named Tom Garrett from a local firm that specialized in rural property. Tom came out in late April with his crew GPS equipment, measuring tools, and a truck full of stakes and flags. We'll mark the boundaries, confirm the corners, and give you a full report, Tom said. Should take a day, maybe 2. I walked the property with him, showing him the old survey markers my grandfather had referenced years ago. Tom made notes, checked his equipment, and got to work. I left him to it and drove home. Tom called me the next afternoon, and his tone was different, careful, almost hesitant. Mr. Bennett, we've finished the boundary survey. But there's something. You need to see. What is it? There's a fence. A big one. And it's on your property. I drove back out immediately. Tom met me near the eastern edge of my land, where the tree line gave way to a clearing. He pointed toward Riverside Meadows. See that fence? It looked about 50 feet into the clearing, running parallel to what I'd assumed was the property line, stood a 6-foot-tall vinyl privacy fence. It was clean, professional, substantial white panels with decorative stone columns every 50 feet. Landscaping surrounded the base, mulched beds, neatly trimmed shrubs, and small ornamental grasses. It looked expensive. That's the HOA's perimeter fence, I said. They built it a few years ago. Remember seeing it from the road. It's not on the HOA's property, Tom said. It's on yours. I stared at him. What? Tom pulled out a large printout, a survey map with GPS coordinates, boundary lines, and the fence location marked in red. The actual property line is here. He pointed to a line on the map, then gestured toward the woods behind us. Runs. Along this tree line, about 20 to 25 feet west of the fence. So the fence is 20 to 25 feet onto your land, Tom said, for about 300 linear feet. I looked back at the fence. It was solid, continuous, and clearly designed to look like a boundary marker, but it wasn't. It was an encroachment. How sure are you? I asked. Completely sure, Tom said. We used GPS, confirmed with the original plat maps filed with the county, and cross-referenced the survey stakes your grandfather had placed. The fence is definitively on your property. I walked closer to the fence, running my hand along one of the stone columns. The construction was professional poured concrete bases, reinforced posts, high-quality vinyl panels. This wasn't some cheap temporary fence. This was permanent. How much do you think this cost? I asked. Tom shrugged. Fencing like this? Stone columns, landscaping, and installation? Probably 30 grand, maybe more. I took photos of the fence, the stone columns, and the landscaping. Then I asked Tom to mark the actual property line, with stakes and flags so there'd be no confusion by the time he finished. The boundary was clear. The fence was 20 to 25 feet onto my land, running for 300 feet along the eastern edge of Riverside Meadows. I went to the county clerk's office the next day and pulled the records. No easement. No recorded agreement. No permit showing the correct property line. The HOA had built the fence without surveying, without confirming ownership, and without asking permission. I checked the building permit database. There was a permit for perimeter fencing filed by Riverside Meadows HOA in 2021. But the permit application didn't include a survey or a detailed site plan showing property boundaries. The county had approved it based on the HOA's representation that the fence would be installed along the eastern boundary of HOA common property. But it was on my property. I found the contact information for the Riverside Meadows HOA president, Margaret Chen. Her name and email were listed on the HOA's website under Board of Directors. I called her that afternoon. She answered on the third ring, her voice professional and polished. Margaret Chen. Ms. Chen. My name is Alex Bennett. I own the 12 acres of land adjacent to Riverside Meadows on the east side. Oh, yes. I'm familiar with the property. What can I do for you? I just had the property surveyed in your perimeter. Fence is on my land. It encroaches about 20 to 25 feet onto my property for 300 feet. There was a pause. I'm sorry, what? The fence? It's not on the property line. It's on my land. That fence has been there for 3 years, Margaret said, her tone shifting defensive, dismissive. It marks the community boundary. No one's ever complained before, because no one surveyed, I said. I have the survey in front of me. Boundary is 20 feet west of your fence. The fence is on my property. We spent $30,000 on that fence, Margaret said. It's a community improvement. It enhances property values for the entire area, including yours. That doesn't change the fact that it's on my land without my permission. Well, it's been there for 3 years. It's long enough to establish use. I'm sure we can work something out, but the fence isn't moving. It needs to be removed, I said, or I'll pursue legal action. Margaret's voice hardened. Mr. Bennett, I don't think you understand the situation. That fence is part of our community. Removing it would cost tens of thousands of dollars and create an eyesore. You're being unreasonable. I'm being reasonable, I said. You built on my land. You need to fix it. Good luck with that, Margaret said. And she hung up. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, then pulled out the survey report and took more photos of the fence. Margaret wasn't going to fix this voluntarily, so I sent a certified demand letter the next day. With the survey attached, re-encroachment, demand for removal, Ms. Chen, as discussed. The perimeter fence constructed by Riverside Meadows HOA encroaches 2025 Feet onto my property, 12 acres adjacent to Riverside Meadows. Parcel ID 4739218. The enclosed survey confirms this encroachment. You are hereby notified that the fence is trespassing on my land and must be removed within 30 days. If the fence is not removed, I will pursue all available legal remedies, including a lawsuit for trespass, encroachment, and damages. Sincerely, Alex Bennett. Margaret's response came a week later, not from her, but from an attorney. The letter was from Whitmore and Associates, representing the Riverside Meadows HOA. Injunctive relief. Plaintiff seeks a court order requiring removal of the fence and restoration of the land. Damages. Plaintiff seeks compensation for loss of use, survey costs, and legal fees. The complaint included the survey, photos, the HOA meeting minutes, obtained later through discovery, and the county permit record showing no survey was ever filed. Patricia's cover letter to the court was direct. Defendants built a $30,000 fence on plaintiff's property without permission, without surveying, and without confirming ownership. When confronted, they refused to remove it, claiming adverse possession despite having no legal basis. This is a clear case of encroachment. Plaintiff is entitled to removal, restoration, and damages. Margaret's response was immediate and public. Day after the lawsuit was filed, she posted in the Riverside Meadows HOA Facebook group, "Urgent. Legal attack on our community. As many of you know, our beautiful perimeter fence along the eastern boundary has been part of our community for 3 years. It enhances our property values, improves safety, and defines our neighborhood. Now, the adjacent landowner, who doesn't even live on his property, is suing to force us to tear it down. He's claiming the fence is on his land, even though it's been there for years without issue. This lawsuit will cost your HOA fees. It will damage our property values. And it's being driven by one person's spite. We need your support. Attend the next board meeting. Spread the word. We're fighting for our community." The post got over 100 reactions and dozens of comments. "He's trying to destroy our fence just to make a point? This is ridiculous. The fence has been there forever. Can we countersue for harassment?" A few voices pushed back. "If it's on his land, don't we have to remove it? Did we survey before we built?" But those comments were buried. I stood at the fence that evening, looking at the clean white panels glowing in the fading light. Margaret had convinced her board to fight. She'd rallied the community. She'd framed me as the villain attacking their fence. But the survey didn't lie. The fence was on my land. And no amount of public relations, community support, or legal bluffing was going to change that. Margaret thought she could refuse removal and force me to accept the encroachment. She was wrong. Because in 3 months, a judge was going to look at the survey, the permit records, and the meeting minutes. And Margaret was going to learn what happens when you build on land you don't own and refuse to fix your mistake. You pay, and you pay a lot. Margaret's public relations campaign escalated quickly. Within days of the lawsuit being filed, she'd expanded beyond the Riverside Meadows HOA Facebook group and started posting in broader community pages, the county residents group, neighborhood watch pages, and local news forums. The posts were carefully crafted to paint me as the villain. Post number 1, June 7th. A landowner adjacent to Riverside Meadows is suing our HOA to force removal of a community fence that's been in place for 3 years. This fence costs $30,000, enhances property values. Now one person wants it torn down, and your HOA fees will pay for it. This is what happens when spite wins over common sense. The post included a photo of the fence. Clean, attractive, professional, with Riverside Meadows homes visible in the background. Comments poured in. "He's trying to tear down a fence that makes the neighborhood look good? That's petty. Sounds like a spite lawsuit. Why can't he just leave it alone? If it's been there for 3 years, isn't it too late to complain? This guy must be miserable." A few people tried to inject reason. If it's on his land, doesn't he have the right to remove it? Did the HOA check property lines before building? But those comments were buried under the anger Margaret had stirred up. Post number 2, June 10th. Update. The lawsuit is moving forward. Our HOA will be forced to spend tens of thousands of dollars defending our community fence. Money that could have been used for amenities, repairs, and improvements. All because one landowner refuses to be reasonable. More reactions. Can we countersue for harassment? He doesn't even live on that land. Why does he care? This is ridiculous. We should organize. Margaret didn't stop at social media. She organized a Save Our Fence petition and circulated it among Riverside Meadows residents and neighboring communities. The petition read, "We, the undersigned, support Riverside Meadows HOA in defending the community perimeter fence. This fence enhances property values, improves safety, and defines our neighborhood. We urge the adjacent landowner to withdraw his lawsuit and allow the fence to remain." Within a week, Margaret had collected over 150 signatures. Residents, neighbors, local business owners who didn't know the full story but saw a headline about a community fence being threatened. She posted a photo of the petition on Facebook, with the caption, "150 plus voices united. We won't back down." Then Margaret contacted the local news. A reporter from the county paper, Jennifer Hayes, reached out to me via email on June 14th. "Mr. Caleb Bennett, I'm working on a story about the lawsuit involving the Riverside Meadows fence. Miss Chen has provided her perspective. I'd like to hear yours. Can we set up an interview?" I forwarded the email to Patricia. Patricia replied, "Decline the interview. Refer her to me? I'll issue a statement. Do not engage directly. Margaret's trying to control the narrative, and anything you say can be twisted." I followed Patricia's advice and replied, "Ms. Hayes, please contact my attorney, Patricia Gaines, for comment. I won't be giving interviews at this time." The article ran 2 days later, front page of the local section. Landowner sues to remove community fence. The story was slanted heavily toward Margaret's narrative. Excerpt. Margaret Chen, president of the Riverside Meadows HOA, says the lawsuit threatens a fence that has been part of the community for 3 years. "This fence is beautiful, functional, and has never caused any problems," Chen said. "Now one person wants to tear it down out of spite, and it's going to cost our homeowners thousands of dollars." Chen disputes the claim that the fence encroaches on the adjacent property. "We relied on the best information available when we built it. The boundary has always been understood to run along the tree line. This is a manufactured dispute." The adjacent landowner, Alex Bennett, declined to be interviewed, but issued a statement through his attorney. "The fence is built 20 feet onto my client's private property without permission. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about property rights. The HOA built on land they don't own and refused to correct their mistake." Chen says the lawsuit is unreasonable and destructive. "We're a community trying to maintain our neighborhood. He's a landowner who doesn't even live here, suing us over a fence he'll never see. It's senseless." The article included a photo of the fence with Riverside Meadows homes in the background, and a quote from a resident. "We love this fence. It makes our community look clean and safe. Losing it would be devastating." No mention of the survey. No mention of the encroachment distance. No mention of the fact that the HOA never confirmed the property line before building. The harassment started that weekend. Days of on Saturday morning, I drove out to the property to check the survey stakes. As I pulled up to my mailbox near the road, I saw it immediately. Someone had spray-painted "Greedy" in red letters across the front of the mailbox. I took photos, then checked the rest of the property. Near the gate at the access road, I found a handwritten note tucked under a rock. "Leave the fence alone. You're hurting families." Another note, on-lined notebook paper, was tied to a tree near the fence. "We know who you are. We won't forget this." I documented everything. Photos, timestamps, exact locations, and filed a police report. The deputy who responded was polite but skeptical. "Do you have any idea who did this?" "I have a good guess," I said, "but no proof." "Without proof, there's not much we can do. We'll file the report, increase patrols in the area, but I understand." The online harassment escalated too. Margaret's allies started driving by my property, taking photos and posting them on social media with comments designed to make me look bad. "Look at all this land he's hoarding. 12 acres of trees, and he won't let a fence stay up. This is what the lawsuit is about. Empty land, no houses, no use. Just one guy's ego." One post included an aerial photo from Google Maps with my property outlined in red, and the caption, "All this space, and he's suing over 20 feet. The comments were predictably hostile. "He doesn't even need that land. Let the fence stay." Selfish landowner versus hardworking families. Easy choice. I screenshotted everything and sent it to Patricia. Patricia was furious when she saw the evidence. This is harassment. This is defamation. And Margaret is orchestrating it. Patricia said, "We're amending the complaint." She filed an amended complaint on June 24th, adding, 4. Harassment defendants and their agents have engaged in a campaign of intimidation, including vandalism, threatening messages, and online defamation. 5. Defamation. Defendants have made false public statements characterizing plaintiff as greedy, spiteful, and unreasonable to damage his reputation. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Defendants' conduct has been extreme, outrageous, and designed to cause emotional harm. Patricia also requested a restraining order barring Margaret and HOA members from entering my property, contacting me directly, or posting defamatory content. Then Margaret staged her publicity stunt. On June 28th, she organized a photo op at the fence. She invited Riverside Meadows families, local residents, and, of course, the press. But Jennifer Hayes, the same reporter who'd written the first article, showed up with a photographer. Margaret stood at the fence with about 20 people, parents, kids, elderly residents, and gave a speech. "It's a symbol of our community. It protects our children. It keeps our neighborhood safe and beautiful. And now, one man is trying to tear it down because he values ego over community." The crowd applauded. Kids held signs reading "Save our fence" and "Community over greed." Margaret pointed to the fence. "This has been here for 3 years. It's harmed no one. It's benefited everyone, and we will fight to keep it." The photographer took pictures. Margaret with residents, kids standing by the fence, families smiling. The article ran the next day with the headline, "Community Rallies to Save Fence." But Patricia had anticipated this. She'd hired a videographer to document the fence and the surrounding area from my side of the property line. The video showed exactly what the fence enclosed. Trees, brush, vacant land. No homes, no children, no playground, no community being protected. The fence didn't protect anything. It was purely decorative, a perimeter marker built on someone else's land without permission. Patricia submitted the video as evidence in our motion for summary judgment, along with the statement. Defendants claim the fence protects children and keeps the community safe. The attached video shows the fence encloses vacant, wooded land owned by plaintiff. There are no children, no homes, and no safety concerns. Defendants' publicity stunt is a distraction from the central issue. They built on land they don't own and refuse to remove their encroachment. I watched Margaret's photo op coverage from home, shaking my head. She'd rallied the community. She'd manipulated the press. She'd painted me as the villain. But none of it changed the facts. The survey was clear. The fence was on my land, and Margaret had built it without asking, without surveying, and without confirming ownership. She thought public opinion would pressure me into backing down. She was wrong, because property law doesn't care about petitions, photo ops, or Facebook posts. And the boundary was clear. Margaret had crossed it, and now she was going to pay to fix it. The case entered the discovery phase in late July, and Patricia wasted no time. She issued subpoenas for all AOA board meeting minutes related to the fence project, correspondence with the fence contractor, any surveys, plat maps, or property documents the HOA reviewed before construction, all internal communications between Margaret Chen and board members regarding the fence, all communications between Margaret and the fence contractor Marcus Whitmore. The HOA's attorney tried to object to some of the requests, claiming they were overly broad and burdensome, but the judge overruled most objections. The documents were relevant, and the HOA had to produce them. The documents arrived in mid-August. Hundreds of pages of emails, meeting minutes, contracts, and correspondence. Patricia and I spent 2 days reviewing everything. Email number 1, March 18, 2021, from Margaret Chen to Riverside Meadows, HOA, board members. Perimeter Fence Project Update, board members. I've received quotes from 3 contractors for the perimeter fence project. The best option is Cascade Fencing. Professional, local, excellent references. Total cost, $32,000 for 300 linear feet of 6-foot vinyl privacy fence with decorative stone columns. The fence will run along the eastern boundary adjacent to the Bennett property, currently vacant land. This will significantly enhance curb appeal and define our community's edge. I'm moving forward with contractor selection. We'll finalize exact placement once construction starts. Margaret. Patricia highlighted the critical line. We'll finalize exact placement once construction starts. No survey, Patricia said. No confirmation of the property line. She planned a $32,000 fence without knowing where the boundary was. Email number 2, April 10th, 2021 from Dan Mercer, Cascade Fencing to Margaret Chen. Subject: Fence placement confirmation. Margaret, just to confirm before we break ground. You want the fence placed along the tree line on the east side, correct? That'll give you the most space and make the fence look cleanest from the road. Do you have a survey showing the property line? We usually recommend confirming boundaries before we start, especially on a project this size. Let me know. Dan. The contractor had asked for a survey. Margaret's reply came the same day. From Margaret Chen to Dan Mercer. Subject: Fence placement confirmation. Dan: yes, place it along the tree line. That's the natural boundary and it'll look best there. We don't need a survey. The property line is obvious from the plat map and the trees mark the edge of our property. We're good to go. Thanks, Margaret. Patricia read the email twice, then looked at me. She told the contractor they didn't need a survey. She represented that the tree line was the property boundary. The contractor relied on her. So the contractor's not liable? Probably not. He asked the right question. She gave him the wrong answer. He built where she told him to build. HOA Board Meeting Minutes, June 15th, 2021. Subject: Perimeter Fence Project Completion. President Chen reported that the perimeter fence project is complete and looks excellent. The contractor finished ahead of schedule, and the final cost came in at $31,400, under budget. Board members walked the fence line and expressed satisfaction with the visual impact. The fence significantly enhances the community's appearance and provides a clear boundary along the eastern edge. Motion to approve final payment to Cascade Fencing. Approved unanimously. No discussion of property boundaries. No mention of a survey. No acknowledgement that the HOA had never confirmed where their property ended and mine began. They'd spent over $30,000 and never checked. Internal email, January 22nd, 2024. This was the smoking gun. I'd sent my initial demand letter with the survey attached. Margaret had forwarded it to one of her board allies, a man named Robert Kim, with a private message. From Margaret Chen to Robert Kim. Subject: Fence issue. Robert, the survey he provided shows the fence is on his land. I didn't realize the boundary was that far west when we built it, but we've invested too much to move it now. Removing and rebuilding would cost $30,000 plus, and it would look terrible. The HOA can't afford it. If we claim adverse possession and refuse to budge, he'll either give up or settle for minimal compensation. We've had the fence up for 3 years. That has to count for something. We can't afford to tear it down. We fight this. Margaret. Patricia read the email out loud, then set it down on the table. She knew, Patricia said. She saw your survey. She knew the fence was on your land, and she chose to fight rather than fix it. Can we use this in court? Absolutely. This proves she acted in bad faith. She wasn't confused about the boundary. She wasn't relying on adverse possession in good faith. She knew she was wrong, and she gambled that you'd back down. Patricia compiled the evidence into a binder and prepared our motion for summary judgment. Key evidence. Margaret never surveyed. Before building, email from March 2021 shows she planned to finalize placement during construction with no survey planned. Contractor asked for survey. Margaret refused. Email from April 2021 shows contractor requested confirmation of property line. Margaret told him it wasn't necessary. No discussion of boundaries in meeting minutes. June 2021 minutes show board approved final payment without ever confirming property ownership. Margaret admitted encroachment in private email. January 2024 email shows Margaret knew the fence was on my land and chose to fight rather than remove it. Patricia's argument was simple and devastating. Defendants built a fence on plaintiff's land. without surveying, without confirming the property line, and without asking permission. When confronted with evidence of encroachment, Defendant Chen admitted the fence was on plaintiff's land, but chose to litigate rather than correct the mistake. This is not a good faith boundary dispute. This is knowing trespass followed by bad faith refusal to remedy. Marcus Whitmore tried to respond, but his position was weak. In his opposition to our motion, he argued, the boundary was unclear because the tree line suggested the property line. The HOA relied on the plat map in good faith. Adverse possession rights were developing over time. Removal would be wasteful and excessive. He couldn't explain why Margaret told the contractor a survey wasn't necessary. He couldn't explain why the board never discussed property boundaries before spending $31,400. And he couldn't explain the January 2024 email, where Margaret admitted the fence was on my land and chose to fight anyway. Patricia scheduled a conference call with Whitmore in early September to discuss settlement. Your client built on my client's land, Patricia said. She knew it after seeing the survey and she chose to fight. Now she's going to lose. The only question is how much this is going to cost her. Whitmore sighed. What are you asking for? Full removal of the fence, restoration of the land, $10,000 in damages, and full attorney's fees, currently $28,000 and growing. That's almost $70,000 total. The HOA can't afford that. Then Margaret shouldn't have built on someone else's land. Can we negotiate? Maybe a boundary adjustment or compensation in lieu of removal? No, Patricia said. The fence comes down? That's non-negotiable. Moore was silent for a moment. I'll talk to my client. 2 days later, Whitmore called back. They won't settle. Margaret's convinced the board that fighting is cheaper than removing the fence. Patricia didn't hesitate. Then we'll see them in court. I sat in Patricia's office, looking at the emails spread across the table. Margaret's casual dismissal of the surveyor's advice, her admission that the fence was on my land, her decision to fight rather than fix it. Margaret had gambled. She'd gambled that I wouldn't survey. She'd gambled that I wouldn't notice. She'd gambled that I wouldn't sue. And when all those gambles failed, she'd gambled that she could outlast me in court. But the evidence didn't lie. Margaret had built on my land without checking. She'd refused to correct her mistake. And now, a judge was going to see exactly what she'd done, and Margaret was going to pay. Every dollar. Every dollar. Every stone column, all of it. Because you don't get to build on someone else's land, admit you were wrong, and then refuse to fix it. Not when the emails prove you knew. And Margaret? She was about to learn that lesson the expensive way. Hearing was scheduled for September 18th at 10 a.m. before Judge Sharon Whitaker, a no-nonsense jurist in her early 60s with over 20 years on the bench and a reputation for strict adherence to property law. Patricia had warned me. Judge Whitaker doesn't tolerate boundary disputes based on assumptions. If you didn't survey, if you didn't confirm, if you built on someone else's land, she's going to rule against you. By the time we arrived at the courthouse at 9:30, the gallery was already packed. The left side was filled with Riverside Meadows residents, at least 40 of them, many wearing matching blue polo shirts with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. Margaret sat at the defense table with Marcus Whitmore, flanked by 2 board members, looking confident. Right side had a handful of locals, a reporter from the county paper, and my neighbor Ed, who'd driven down to watch. Patricia and I took our seats at the plaintiff's table. She set down a thick binder of evidence, her laptop, and a portable display screen for presenting documents. At exactly 10 a.m., the bailiff stood. All rise. Honorable Judge Sharon Whitaker presiding. Judge Whitaker entered, took her seat, and immediately opened the case file. This is Bennett versus Riverside Meadows HOA. We're here on cross motions for summary judgment regarding an alleged fence encroachment. Mr. Whitmore, you may begin. Marcus Whitmore stood and addressed the court with practiced confidence. Your Honor, this case involves a fence that has been part of the Riverside Meadows community for over 3 years. The fence was built in good faith, has enhanced property values, and has caused no harm to the plaintiff. Whitmore walked to a display board showing photos of the fence. Clean, attractive, professional. This fence cost the HOA over $31,000. It was built to improve the community's appearance and define the boundary between Riverside Meadows and the adjacent vacant land. Plaintiff now claims the fence encroaches on his property by 20 feet, but he didn't object for 3 years. He didn't use that land, and he's suffered no damages. Whitmore turned to face the judge. The encroachment, if any, is minimal. The land in question is wooded, unused, and offers no practical value to the plaintiff. Removing the fence would cost tens of thousands of dollars and create an eyesore. It would be wasteful, unnecessary, and punitive. He paused. He asked the court to deny the demand for removal and allow the plaintiff reasonable compensation instead, a boundary adjustment or payment for the encroached area. That would be fair, practical, and serve the interests of all parties. Whitmore sat down. Judge Whitaker made a note. Miss Gaines? Patricia stood, calm and methodical, and began.
Your Honor, this case is not about reasonableness or good faith.
It's about property rights. The defendants built a fence on plaintiff's land without permission. When confronted, they refused to remove it. They claim adverse possession despite having no legal basis. And they argue that plaintiff should simply accept the encroachment because removal would be expensive. Patricia opened her binder. Let's address the facts. The survey is definitive. Patricia projected the first exhibit. The licensed surveyor's report, complete with GPS coordinates, boundary markers, and a detailed map showing the fence's location relative to the property line. This survey was conducted by a licensed professional using GPS technology and cross-referenced with the original 1976 plat map filed with the county. The results are clear. The fence encroaches 20 to 25 feet onto plaintiff's property for approximately 300 linear feet. We click to the next slide. Photos of the surveyor's boundary stakes, with the fence clearly visible 20-plus feet beyond them. The boundary is not in dispute. The fence is on plaintiff's land. No adverse possession exists. Patricia clicked to a slide showing North Carolina's adverse possession statute. Defendants claim adverse possession, but North Carolina requires 20 years of continuous, open, notorious, and hostile use. The fence has been in place for 3 years. Defendants are 17 years short. The clock hasn't even started. She looked at the judge. There is no adverse possession claim here. None. Defendants knew or should have known. Patricia projected the email from Margaret to the fence contractor, the one where the contractor asked for a survey, and Margaret replied, "We don't need a survey. The property line is obvious from the plat map." The contractor asked the right question. Miss Chen gave the wrong answer. She told him to proceed without surveying, and she represented that the property line was obvious. Patricia clicked to the next email. Margaret's January 2024 message to board member Robert Kim. The survey he provided shows the fence is on his land, about 20 feet over the line. If we claim adverse possession and refuse to budge, he'll either give up or settle for minimal compensation. We can't afford to tear it down. Patricia let the silence hang in the courtroom. Ms. Chen knew the fence was on plaintiff's land. She admitted it in writing, and she chose to fight rather than correct her mistake. Plaintiff has the right to removal. Patricia clicked to a photo of my property showing the wooded area where I plan to build. Defendants claim the encroachment is minimal. It's not. The fence is 300 feet long and 20 to 25 feet deep. It occupies over 7,000 square feet of plaintiff's land, and it sits directly on the site where plaintiff plans to build a home. She projected the building site plan I'd submitted for the permit application, showing the fence cutting directly through the planned driveway and front yard. This isn't unused land. This is plaintiff's planned home site. The fence blocks access and interferes with his plans. It has every right to demand removal. No building permit was obtained. Patricia projected the county permit records. DHOA obtained a building permit for the fence in April 2021, but the permit application stated the fence would be on HOA property. No survey was submitted. No site plan showing the property line. The county relied on the HOA's representation. She clicked to an email from the county code enforcement officer. If the fence is not on HOA property, the permit was issued based on incorrect information. That constitutes a violation. Contractor testimony. Patricia played a video deposition from Dan Mercer, the fence contractor. On screen, Dan sat in a conference room answering Patricia's questions. Patricia, Mr. Bearden, Mercer, did you ask Miss Chen if the HOA had a survey before you started construction? Dan. Yes. I always ask. Boundary fences can be tricky. And I didn't want to build on the wrong property. Patricia, what did Miss Chen tell you? Dan. She said they didn't need a survey. She said the property line was obvious from the plat map, and that the tree line marked the boundary. She told me to proceed. Patricia, did you rely on her representation? Dan. Yes. She was the client. I assumed she'd done her due diligence. The video ended. Patricia turned to the judge. The contractor did his job. He asked the right question. Ms. Chen gave him the wrong answer. This encroachment is entirely the result of defendant's failure to confirm the property line. Judge Whitaker leaned forward and looked directly at Margaret. Ms. Chen, I have a question for you. Margaret stood, glancing nervously at Whitmore. Yes, Your Honor? Did you obtain a survey before building this fence? Margaret hesitated. We relied on the plat map. That's not what I asked. Did you obtain a survey, yes or no? No, Your Honor. Did you confirm the property line with the adjacent landowner before building? He wasn't living there at the time. Did you attempt to contact him or the property owner of record? Margaret's voice dropped. No, Your Honor. So you built a fence costing over $30,000 without surveying, without confirming ownership, and without asking permission from the adjacent landowner. Is that correct? We thought the boundary was clear. You thought, but you didn't verify. And now you're arguing that Mr. Bennett should accept your mistake because removing the fence would be expensive. Removing it would be wasteful. Judge Whitaker's tone sharpened. That's your problem, Miss Chen, not his. You built on land you don't own. He has every right to demand removal. Margaret sat down, her face flushed. Judge Whitaker took less than 5 minutes to review her notes. She delivered her ruling. The evidence is clear. The survey is definitive. The fence encroaches 20 to 25 feet onto plaintiff's property. Defendants built, without surveying, without confirming ownership, and without permission. She looked at Marcus Whitmore. There is no adverse possession. 3 years does not meet the statutory requirement of 20 years. The claim is without merit. She turned to Margaret. Miss Chen, you made a costly mistake by not surveying before building. That mistake is yours to fix, not Mr. Bennett's to accept. The ruling encroachment is clear and undisputed. The fence must be removed. Removal deadline, 90 days from today's date. Defendants must remove the fence, posts, stone columns, and landscaping, and restore the land to its original condition. Damages: defendants shall pay plaintiff $8,000 for lost use of land, survey costs, and related expenses. Attorney's fees: defendants shall pay plaintiff's attorney's fees in the amount of $22,500. No adverse possession or prescriptive rights exist. Judge Whitaker closed the file. Ms. Chen, you don't get to build on someone else's property and then force them to accept it because removal is expensive. The fence comes down, you pay for it. That's the consequence of failing to do basic due diligence. She looked at both tables. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. Margaret sat frozen at the defense table, her face pale, her hands clenched. Whitmore gathered his papers quickly and stood without looking at the gallery. The Riverside Meadows residents in the courtroom sat in stunned silence. A few whispered to each other. One woman shook her head and walked out. Patricia leaned over to me. Total cost to the HOA, removal and restoration, probably $25,000. Damages, $8,000. Attorney's fees, $22,500. That's over $55,000 when you add it all up. And they spent $31,000 to build it, I said. Correct. So they're out about $86,000 total for a fence they have to tear down. Ed caught up with me in the hallway. That was brutal. She had every chance to fix this, I said. She chose to fight instead, and now she's paying for it. I nodded. Because Margaret had gambled. Gambled that I wouldn't survey, wouldn't notice, wouldn't sue, wouldn't win. And she'd lost every bet. The fence was coming down. Margaret was paying for removal. And the HOA was about to learn the most expensive lesson in its history. Survey before you build. Confirm before you assume. And never ever build on land you don't own. Because if you do, the judge will make you tear it down. At your expense. Ruling was reported in the county paper the next day, this time with a very different tone. Judge orders HOA to remove fence built on private land. The article was factual and detailed, quoting Judge Whitaker's ruling and highlighting the key evidence. The emails showing Margaret had refused to survey, her admission that the fence was on my land and the total cost to the HOA, over $55,000. Excerpt. Judge Sharon Whitaker ruled that the Riverside Meadows HOA must remove a perimeter fence that encroaches 20.25 feet onto adjacent private property. The HOA will pay for removal, land restoration, damages, and the property owner's legal fees, totaling over $55,000. Evidence presented at the hearing showed HOA President Margaret Chen never obtained a survey before building the $31,000 fence, and later admitted in writing that she knew the fence was on the landowner's property but chose to litigate rather than remove it. You made a costly mistake by not surveying before building, Judge Whitaker told Chen. That mistake is yours to fix, not Mr. Bennett's to accept. The article included a statement from Patricia. Property owners have the right to control their land. When someone builds on your property without permission, you're entitled to removal, regardless of cost or inconvenience to the trespasser. Public opinion shifted immediately. The Riverside Meadows HOA Facebook group exploded. Post number 1 to September 19th, 8:42 a.m. I just read the full court ruling. Margaret never surveyed before building the fence. She spent $31,000 of our money without confirming the property line, and now we're paying another $55,000 to tear it down and cover damages. This is gross negligence. The comments poured in. She told the contractor they didn't need a survey. Are you kidding me? We trusted her to manage a $30,000 project, and she couldn't be bothered to confirm we were building on our land? Now our HOA fees are going up to cover this disaster. This is what happens when the board doesn't do basic due diligence. Post number 2, 11:18 a.m. The judge's ruling says Margaret K. knew the fence was on his land after he sent the survey, and she chose to fight instead of fixing it. She gambled with our money and lost. More replies. She admitted it in an email. She knew, and she dragged us into a lawsuit we couldn't win. We signed the petition, and the whole time she knew she was wrong. Emergency meeting needs to be called. She has to go. The emergency HOA meeting was held on September 24th at 7 p.m. in the Riverside Meadows Clubhouse. Over 160 residents attended, the largest turnout in the community's history. Margaret sat at the board table visibly uncomfortable, flanked by the 2 remaining board members who'd supported her. Other 2 had resigned the day after the ruling. The new acting treasurer, a man named James Torres, opened the meeting by reading the financial impact. The court has ordered us to pay $8,000 in damages, $22,000 in legal fees, and we're estimating $25,000 to $30,000 for fence removal and land restoration. Total cost, approximately $55,000 to $60,000. He paused. We built the fence for $31,000, so we've spent roughly $86,000 total on a fence we now have to tear down. The room erupted in angry murmurs. One resident stood. Margaret, did you survey the property line before we built that fence? Margaret's voice was tight. We relied on the plat map and the tree line. We thought the boundary was clear. That's not what I asked. Did you hire a surveyor? Yes or no? No. Why not? Because surveys cost money, and we were trying to stay within budget. Another resident cut her off. You spent $31,000 without spending $500 on a survey, and now we're paying $55,000 to fix your mistake? Margaret didn't answer. Third resident stood, holding a printout of the court ruling. The judge quoted an email where you admitted the fence was on his land. You knew, and you chose to fight anyway. You gambled with our money. I was trying to protect the community's investment. You were trying to cover up your own mistake, the resident said. And it backfired. You cost this HOA $86,000 because you didn't do basic due diligence. James Torres called for order, then read the motion. Motion to remove Margaret Chen as HOA president, effective immediately. The motion was seconded. The vote was called. 142 in favor. 18 opposed. Margaret stood, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the meeting without another word. The new interim board president was a woman named Linda Reeves, a retired project manager who'd been on the architectural review committee and had quietly opposed Margaret's aggressive tactics. 3 days after the meeting, I received an email from her. Subject, apology and next steps. Bennett, my name is Linda Reeves, and I've been elected interim president of the Riverside Meadows HOA following the recent ruling and leadership change. On behalf of the board and our community, I want to formally apologize for the actions of our prior leadership. The fence should never have been built without surveying. The lawsuit should never have happened. And the harassment you experienced was unacceptable. We are moving forward with the court-ordered removal. The fence will be dismantled within the 90-day deadline, and the land will be restored to its original condition. Thank you for your patience, and we hope to be better neighbors moving forward. Sincerely, Linda Reeves, I replied. Miss Reeves, folding the acknowledgement and the change in leadership, I'll be available to coordinate access for the removal crew. Let me know when the work is scheduled to begin. Alex Bennett. The fence removal began on October 2nd and took 2 full weeks. A contractor crew arrived with a flatbed truck, power tools, and a small excavator. I drove out to oversee the process and document the work. The crew dismantled the vinyl panels first, stacking them on the truck. Then they removed the decorative stone columns, 12 of them, each weighing several hundred pounds. The columns had to be broken apart with jackhammers because they were anchored in deep concrete footings. Next, they pulled the fence posts, 40 of them, buried 3 feet deep in concrete. The excavator dug out each post, leaving gaping holes in the ground. Finally, they removed the landscaping, shrubs, mulch beds, ornamental grasses. Everything that had been planted along the fence line was pulled up, hauled away, and disposed of. By the end of the 2nd week, the fence was gone. The land was scarred. Raw earth, holes, tire tracks from the excavator, but empty. The contractor spent another week restoring the land, filling the holes, grading the soil, reseeding with grass, and spreading straw mulch to prevent erosion. When they finished, I walked the property line with Linda Reeves and the contractor. The land wasn't perfect, but it was restored. The boundary was clear, and the encroachment was gone. Linda handed me a check for $8,000, the court-ordered damages. We also received the invoice for your attorney's fees. Linda said, $22,500. We'll pay it within 30 days. Thank you, I said. Linda looked at the empty strip of land where the fence had been. We're planting new shrubs on our side of the line this time, professionally surveyed. 5 feet inside our property, just to be safe. That's smart, I said. It's what we should have done 3 years ago, Linda said quietly. I'm sorry it took a lawsuit to get there. Over the next few weeks, several Riverside Meadows residents approached me individually, some at the property, some via email, to apologize. One man stopped by while I was walking the land. Mr. Bennett, I'm Tom Caldwell. I live in Riverside Meadows. I signed the petition against you. I posted angry comments online. I didn't know the full story. I'm sorry. I appreciate that, I said. Margaret told us you were trying to destroy our property values. She made it sound like you were the villain. I didn't realize she'd never surveyed. I didn't realize she knew the fence was on your land. A lot of people didn't know, I said. Well, for what it's worth, you were right. And you handled it better than I would have. Another resident, a woman named Karen Liu, sent me an email. Mr. Bennett, I was one of the people in Margaret's photo op. I held a Save Our Fence sign. I feel embarrassed now that I know the truth. You were defending your property rights, and we attacked you for it. I'm sorry. I replied to each apology the same way. Thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement. No hard feelings. 4 months later, in February, Ed called me. Margaret's house just went up for sale. I pulled up the listing online. The photos showed her home, well-maintained, professionally staged, with a price of $520,000. The listing had been active for 2 days. Ed sent a follow-up text. She's leaving. Can't say I blame her. She cost the HOA $86,000 and got voted out. No way she was staying. Margaret sold the house 6 weeks later and moved out of Riverside Meadows. I never saw her again. Months after the ruling, Linda Reeve sent me another email with photos attached. Subject: New boundary landscaping, Mr. Bennett. I wanted to share photos of the new landscaping we installed along our eastern boundary. We hired a licensed surveyor to confirm the property line, and we planted decorative shrubs and ornamental grasses 5 feet inside our property, while clear of your land. It's not a fence, but it defines the boundary and looks clean. We learned our lesson. Survey first. Confirm ownership. Respect boundaries. Thank you again for your patience. Linda. The photos showed a neat row of evergreen shrubs, mulched beds, and small ornamental grasses. Attractive, functional, and entirely on HOA property, I replied. Looks great. Thank you for doing it right this time. I stood at my property line one evening in late March, looking at the empty strip of land where Margaret's fence had been. The grass had grown back. The soil had settled. The boundary was clear. Margaret had spent $31,000 building a fence on land she didn't own. She'd spent another $55,000 tearing it down. She'd lost her position as HOA president. She'd been forced to sell her home and leave the community. All because she didn't spend $500 on a survey. Because she assumed. Because she cut corners. Because she thought she could build on someone else's land and force them to accept it. And when she was caught, she doubled down instead of fixing her mistake. Fence was gone now. The land was restored. And Riverside Meadows had learned the most expensive lesson in its history. Survey before you build. Confirm before you assume. And never ever build on land you don't own. Because if you do, the judge will make you tear it down. At your expense. And Margaret Chen, she was gone, leaving behind an $86,000 lesson that Riverside Meadows would never forget. I stood at the property line on a clear afternoon in early April, looking out over the strip of land where Margaret's fence had been. The grass had grown back thick and green. The soil had settled. The boundary markers, surveyors' stakes with bright orange flags, stood in a neat line, defining exactly where my property ended and Riverside Meadows began. The fence was gone, the stone columns were gone, the landscaping was gone. All that remained was open land, restored and mine. I thought about Margaret Chen, about the first time she dismissed my concerns, confident and dismissive, telling me the fence had been there for 3 years and wasn't moving. She'd called me greedy. Saeed, I was tearing out a fence for spite. Saeed, I was attacking the community. But that fence was never hers to build. That land was never hers to use. And the 25 feet of my property she'd occupied for 3 years? That was never hers to take. Margaret had gambled. She'd gambled that I wouldn't survey the property. She'd gambled that I wouldn't notice the encroachment. She'd gambled that I wouldn't care about 20 feet of wooded land. And when all those gambles failed, she'd gambled that I wouldn't fight back. That the cost, the time, and the public pressure would force me to give up. She lost every bet. Margaret had thought 3 years of encroachment created rights. She'd argued adverse possession, prescriptive easement, and established use. But North Carolina law required 20 years? She had 3. Bach hadn't even started. She'd thought community benefit justified ignoring property boundaries. She'd argued the fence enhanced property values and served the public good. But property rights don't disappear because someone built something nice on your land. You don't get to trespass just because the trespass looks pretty. She'd thought she could refuse removal and force me to accept compensation instead. A boundary adjustment, a cash settlement, anything but tearing down a $31,000 fence. But I didn't want compensation. I wanted my land back. And Judge Whitaker agreed. The removal had taken 2 weeks. I'd watched the contractor crew dismantle the vinyl panels, jackhammer the stone columns, excavate the fence posts, and haul everything away. The work had cost the HOA an estimated $28,000. Add the $8,000 in damages, the $22,000 in attorney's fees, and the $31,000 it spent building the fence in the first place, and the total was over $86,000. $86,000 to build a fence on someone else's land, refuse to move it, lose in court and tear it down, all because Margaret Chen didn't spend $500 on a survey. I walked along the restored boundary, checking the new growth, the reseeded grass, the surveyor's stakes. Everything was in order. On the Riverside Meadows side, 5 feet inside their property line, Linda Reeves had planted a neat row of evergreen shrubs and ornamental grasses, attractive, functional, and entirely on HOA land. This time they'd surveyed. This time they'd confirmed ownership. This time they'd done it right. I'd taken an $86,000 lesson, a lawsuit, and the removal of their HOA president. But they'd learned. Margaret had thought she could build on my land and I'd just accept it. She was wrong. Because property law is simple, it doesn't care about community benefit. It doesn't care about how much you spent. It doesn't care about petitions, photo ops, or public opinion. It cares about one thing: who owns the land. And I owned the land. Margaret built a fence on property she didn't own, without surveying, without asking, and without confirming the boundary. When she was caught, she refused to fix her mistake. She doubled down. She fought. She rallied the community. She launched a publicity campaign. She hired an attorney and litigated for months. And she lost. The fence came down. The HOA paid. And Margaret? She sold her house and left the community, humiliated and financially damaged, her reputation destroyed by the very fight she'd chosen. I stood at the gate near the access road, looking back at the 12 acres that stretched out behind me. Quiet, wooded, and entirely mine. Margaret had called this land wasted space. She'd posted photos online with captions like, "Look at all this land he's hoarding." But it wasn't wasted. It wasn't hoarded. It was mine. And I had every right to protect it. I'd spent months fighting to remove a fence I never asked for, built on land I never gave permission to use. I'd been harassed, defamed, and attacked by people who didn't know the facts, but I'd stood my ground. Because property rights matter, boundaries matter. And when someone crosses the line, literally, they have to face the consequences. The lesson was clear, and Riverside Meadows had learned it the expensive way. Survey before you build. Confirm before you assume. Respect property lines, or pay the price to fix your mistake. Margaret thought she could skip the survey, rely on a tree line, and build wherever it looked right. She thought she could refuse removal and force me to accept her encroachment. She thought being HOA president gave her power over land outside her jurisdiction. She was wrong on every count. And now, every time someone in Riverside Meadows looked at that empty strip of land where the fence used to be, they'd remember. They'd remember the $86,000 lesson. They'd remember the lawsuit. They'd remember Margaret Chen, who gambled with the HOA's money and lost everything. And they'd remember the most important rule in property law: you can't build on land you don't own. And if you try, the judge will make you tear it down, at your expense. I locked the gate, climbed into my truck, and drove back toward town. The fence was gone. The land was restored. And my property was mine again. Margaret had thought she could take 25 feet of my land and I'd just accept it. She was wrong. Because in the end, property law doesn't care how confident you are, how many people support you, or how much you've already spent. It only cares about the boundary. And the boundary was clear. Margaret crossed it. And she paid the price. $86,000. Every dollar she gambled. Every foot of fencing she built. Every stone column she installed. All of it. Gone. 'Cause you can't build on land you don't own. And if you try, the judge will make you tear it down. At your expense. Margaret learned that lesson. The hard way. And now Riverside Meadows would never forget it.